Sarah Martinez had always known that being the only female handler in the elite K9 unit would come with challenges. What she hadn't expected was the systematic campaign to destroy her career that began on a cold Tuesday morning in March. The military base in Fort Bragg buzzed with its usual activity as Sarah made her way to the kennels. Her German Shepherd, Rex, had been her partner for 3 years. Together, they had completed 2 successful deployments overseas, detecting explosives and saving countless lives. Rex was more than a working dog to her. He was family. Sarah noticed something was different the moment she approached Rex's kennel. The usually alert and happy dog was lying in the corner, his head down, refusing to make eye contact. Her heart sank as she opened the kennel door and knelt beside him. "Hey, boy, what's wrong?" she whispered, running her hands along his fur. Rex flinched at her touch, something he had never done before. That's when she noticed the small cuts along his legs and the way he favored his left paw. "Having trouble with your mutt, Martinez?" The voice belonged to Sergeant Mike Thompson, one of the senior handlers who had made it clear from day one that he didn't think women belonged in the K9 unit. Behind him stood 3 other handlers, Jake Collins, Robert Hayes, and Danny Foster. All of them were smirking. Sarah stood up slowly, her jaw clenched. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing that a proper handler couldn't fix," Thompson replied, crossing his arms. "Maybe if you actually knew how to train a dog instead of treating him like a pet, he'd perform better." The accusation stung because Sarah knew it wasn't true. Rex had the highest success rate in the unit for explosive detection. Their bond was the reason they worked so well together, not a weakness. "Rex is fine. He just needs rest," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is he?" Collins stepped forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "Because word around base is that you've been too soft on him. Some people think maybe you're not cut out for this job." Sarah felt her temper rising, but forced herself to stay calm. She had learned early in her military career that losing control only gave them ammunition to use against her. "My record speaks for itself." "Does it?" Hayes joined the conversation. "Because I heard there might be some questions about that last mission in Afghanistan. Something about you freezing up when things got tough." The lie hit Sarah like a physical blow. During their last deployment, she and Rex had successfully located an IED that would have killed dozens of soldiers. Far from freezing up, she had risked her own life to ensure the bomb was properly marked for disposal. "That's not what happened, and you know it," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. Thompson stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Prove it. There's a training exercise this afternoon. Full combat simulation. If you and your dog can handle it without any special treatment, maybe we'll consider that you belong here." Sarah knew this was a setup. Thompson and his crew had been looking for an excuse to get rid of her for months. But backing down wasn't an option. Not when Rex's well-being was at stake, and certainly not when her entire career hung in the balance. "Fine," she said. "We'll be there." "Good." Thompson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because the whole unit will be watching, including Lieutenant Colonel Davidson." As the men walked away, laughing among themselves, Sarah turned back to Rex. She gently examined his injuries more thoroughly. They weren't life-threatening, but they were deliberate. Someone had been rough with him, possibly using training tools inappropriately to make him fearful and less responsive. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered, stroking his head. "I should have protected you better." Rex looked up at her with his intelligent brown eyes, and she could see the confusion there. He didn't understand why he had been hurt or why the people he had been trained to trust had turned on him. Sarah spent the morning working with Rex, using gentle techniques to rebuild his confidence. She gave him his favorite treats and engaged in basic obedience drills that would help restore their connection. Slowly, she began to see glimpses of the confident dog he had been. As lunchtime approached, word about the afternoon's test had spread throughout the base. Sarah could feel eyes on her wherever she went. Some were sympathetic. There were others who respected her work and knew she was being targeted unfairly. But many others seemed eager to watch her fail. The training exercise was scheduled for 1,400 hours at the obstacle course behind the main barracks. It was designed to simulate urban combat conditions, complete with mock buildings, simulated gunfire, and hidden explosive devices that the K9 teams would need to locate. Sarah arrived early to survey the course. Something felt wrong immediately. The obstacles were set up differently than usual, with more potential hazards and fewer safe zones. The simulated explosives were hidden in locations that would require both dog and handler to expose themselves to unnecessary risk. Looks challenging, doesn't it? The voice startled her. She turned to see Commander Jake Morrison approaching. Morrison was a Navy SEAL who had been temporarily assigned to the base as a liaison officer. Unlike many of the other Special Forces personnel, he had always treated Sarah with professional respect. "It's different from our usual setup," Sarah replied carefully. She didn't know Morrison well enough to trust him completely, but something in his demeanor suggested he might be an ally. "Different how?" Morrison asked, studying the course with experienced eyes. Sarah pointed out several of the changes she had noticed. Morrison nodded thoughtfully as she spoke, his expression growing more serious. "You know they're trying to set you up, right?" he said quietly. "I figured as much," Sarah replied. "But I can't back down now." Morrison was quiet for a moment, watching as other handlers and their dogs began to arrive for the exercise. "Mind if I observe? I've been curious about K9 operations." Sarah shrugged. "It's supposed to be a demonstration anyway." As 1,400 hours approached, a crowd had gathered. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson was there, along with several other senior officers. Thompson and his crew stood nearby, their confidence evident. They believed they had engineered the perfect trap. The exercise began with 2 other K9 teams running the course first. Both completed their runs successfully, though Sarah noticed they faced different obstacles than what she had observed earlier. When her turn came, the course had been subtly modified again. "Martinez, you're up," Thompson called out, his voice carrying across the training area. Sarah clipped Rex's working harness and checked her own gear. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but she forced herself to focus on Rex. Whatever happened, they would face it together. "Ready, boy?" she asked Rex quietly. The dog looked up at her, and she was relieved to see some of his old confidence returning. He wagged his tail once, their signal that he was ready to work. Sarah led Rex to the starting line. The course stretched out before them like a maze of potential dangers. Mock buildings created narrow alleys and dead ends. Simulated debris provided cover for hidden threats. And somewhere in that maze were the explosive devices they needed to find. "Begin," Lieutenant Colonel Davidson called out. Sarah and Rex moved forward together, their years of training and partnership guiding them through the initial obstacles. Rex's nose worked constantly, sorting through the complex sense around them. Sarah watched his body language, reading the subtle signs that told her when he was detecting something important. They successfully located the first simulated explosive device hidden beneath a pile of rubble. Rex sat and stared at the location, his trained response to indicate a find. Sarah marked the location and they moved on. The second device was hidden inside a mock building. As they entered, Sarah noticed how narrow the space was and how the lighting had been deliberately dimmed. Rex hesitated at the threshold, his earlier trauma making him more cautious than usual. "It's okay, boy," Sarah encouraged him. "We've got this." They worked their way through the building methodically. Rex's confidence grew as they progressed, and soon he had located the second device. As they exited the building and moved toward the third section of the course, Sarah noticed Thompson speaking quietly into his radio. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but his timing made her suspicious. The final section of the course was the most challenging. It required them to navigate a series of elevated platforms and narrow bridges while searching for the remaining explosive devices. As they climbed onto the first platform, Sarah heard the sound of multiple footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to see 6 large German shepherds being led toward their section of the course by handlers she didn't recognize. These weren't the usual training dogs. They were larger, more aggressive-looking animals that she had never seen before. "What's going on?" Sarah called out to Thompson. "Added realism," he replied with a grin. "You'll need to complete the course while managing potential interference from hostile working dogs." Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't part of any standard training protocol. The approaching dogs were showing clear signs of agitation, and their handlers seemed to be deliberately encouraging their aggressive behavior. Rex sensed the threat immediately. His body tensed, and he moved closer to Sarah's side. These dogs weren't trained for cooperation. They were being used as weapons. "This isn't safe," Sarah protested. Rex isn't trained for this kind of encounter. Then, maybe you should have thought of that before claiming you could handle anything the unit threw at you, Thompson replied. The 6 hostile dogs were being positioned around the base of the platform where Sarah and Rex stood. Their handlers had them on long leads that would give them enough range to reach the platform while maintaining some control. Sarah looked around desperately for support. Most of the observers seemed confused by this turn of events, but Lieutenant Colonel Davidson wasn't intervening. Either he had authorized this modification, or he was waiting to see how she handled the challenge. Commander Morrison stepped forward slightly, his eyes focused intently on the situation. Sarah couldn't read his expression, but she sensed he was evaluating something beyond just her performance. "You have 5 minutes to complete the remaining course," Thompson announced. "Clock starts now." The hostile dogs began barking aggressively, their handlers allowing them to surge forward to the base of the platform. Rex pressed against Sarah's leg, his training warring with his natural instinct to either fight or flee. Sarah made a quick decision. She couldn't complete the course safely with Rex under this kind of pressure, but she couldn't abandon the exercise either. Her career, and possibly Rex's life, depended on finding a way through this impossible situation. "Stay close," she whispered to Rex, and began moving across the narrow bridge toward the next platform. That's when Thompson gave the signal she had been dreading. The handlers released their grip on the leads, and 6 aggressive German shepherds charged toward the platform, their teeth bared, and their intent unmistakably hostile. Rex planted himself between Sarah and the approaching dogs, every muscle in his body tense with the effort of controlling his own fear and aggression. Sarah knew that in seconds, her partner would be fighting for both their lives against overwhelming odds. As the first of the hostile dogs reached the base of the platform and began climbing toward them, Sarah realized that this had been the plan all along. They hadn't just set up an impossible test. They had engineered a situation where Rex would be forced to fight, and almost certainly be injured or killed in the process. The crowd of observers had gone silent, everyone realizing that they were no longer watching a training exercise. They were witnessing something much darker, a deliberate attempt to destroy both Sarah's career and her partner. The lead dog reached the platform and crouched low, preparing to spring at Rex. Sarah's mind raced, searching for any option that might save them both. Rex was a good dog and a brave one, but he was outnumbered 6-1 by animals that had been trained to attack. In that moment of crisis, as the hostile dog prepared to launch itself at Rex, Sarah heard a sharp whistle cut through the air, a sound unlike any training command she knew. The attacking dog froze mid-crouch, its head turning toward the source of the sound. Commander Morrison had stepped forward, and something about his posture had changed completely. The casual observer had been replaced by someone radiating an authority that even the aggressive dogs could sense. The real test, Sarah realized, was just beginning. The whistle that Commander Morrison had blown wasn't just any sound. It was a specialized command that Sarah had never heard before. The 6 aggressive dogs froze instantly, their attack posture dissolving as they looked toward him with sudden uncertainty. Morrison stepped forward with the confident stride of someone who had commanded respect in far more dangerous situations than this. His voice, when he spoke, carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions. "Stand down," he commanded. And though he was speaking to the dog handlers, his tone made it clear he was addressing everyone present. Thompson stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Commander, this is a K9 unit exercise. You have no authority here." Morrison's gaze fixed on Thompson with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Sergeant, I've been observing this unit for 3 weeks on direct orders from Joint Special Operations Command. What I'm witnessing here isn't training, it's sabotage." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical force. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he began to understand the implications. "Commander Morrison, what exactly are you saying?" Davidson asked. "I'm saying that this exercise was deliberately designed to injure or kill Sergeant Martinez's dog, and possibly Sergeant Martinez herself," Morrison replied, his voice carrying clearly across the training area. "The course modifications, the timing, the use of these untrained aggressive animals. None of this follows any legitimate training protocol." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief, but she forced herself to maintain her position on the platform. Rex was still pressed against her side, his body trembling with the stress of the confrontation. Thompson's face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain his aggressive stance. That's ridiculous. This is standard combat realism training. Is it? Morrison pulled out a tablet and began reading. Standard protocol requires a minimum of 3 safety officers for any exercise involving multiple aggressive animals. I count 0. Standard protocol requires veterinary personnel on standby when animals are placed in potential conflict situations. Again, I see none. Most importantly, standard protocol never allows the use of deliberately conditioned attack animals in training exercises with working K9 teams. He looked up from the tablet, his eyes scanning the faces of Thompson and his allies. Unless someone can explain to me why those protocols were abandoned, I'm shutting this down immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson had gone silent, clearly processing the implications of what Morrison was revealing. Sarah could see him beginning to understand that he had been manipulated into authorizing something that could have resulted in serious injuries or deaths. Morrison raised his hand, and, to Sarah's amazement, the 6 aggressive dogs immediately backed away from the platform. Their handlers, looking confused and, suddenly, uncertain about their role in the exercise, began pulling the animals back. "How did you do that?" Sarah called down to Morrison. Military working dogs are trained to respond to authority commands from any qualified handler. Morrison explained as he climbed up onto the platform to join her and Rex. "But these aren't military working dogs, are they?" He knelt beside Rex, extending his hand slowly to allow the dog to catch his scent. Rex, still nervous but recognizing friendly intent, sniffed Morrison's hand and allowed him to pet his head. "This boy's been abused recently," Morrison said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge as he examined the cuts on Rex's legs. "Who had access to him last night?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Sarah watched as Thompson and his allies exchanged nervous glances. Their carefully planned operation was unraveling, and Morrison's presence had shifted the entire dynamic. "Rex was fine when I left him yesterday evening," Sarah said. "When I came in this morning, he had these injuries and was acting fearful." Morrison nodded, his expression grim. "Sergeant Martinez, I need you to take Rex to the veterinary clinic immediately. I want a full examination and documentation of all injuries." "Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, grateful for the excuse to get Rex away from this hostile environment. As she prepared to climb down from the platform with Rex, Morrison called out to the assembled crowd. "This exercise is terminated. Everyone not directly involved in the investigation needs to clear the area immediately." The crowd began to disperse, but Thompson and his 3 allies remained, their defiance now mixed with obvious fear. They had overplayed their hand, and Morrison's intervention had turned their trap into their own potential downfall. Sarah made her way to the veterinary clinic with Rex, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. Dr. Emily Rodriguez, the base veterinarian, was a friend who had always been supportive of Sarah's work with Rex. "Sarah, what happened?" Dr. Rodriguez asked as soon as she saw Rex's condition. "Someone hurt him," Sarah replied simply. "Commander Morrison wants a full examination and documentation." Dr. Rodriguez's expression darkened as she began examining Rex. "These aren't accidental injuries," she said after several minutes. "Someone used a shock collar on him, probably repeatedly. See these burn marks? And these cuts look like they came from a prong collar that was deliberately tightened too much." The confirmation of what Sarah had suspected made her feel sick. Rex had been tortured, not just to make him perform poorly, but to break the bond between them that made their partnership so effective. The psychological trauma might be worse than the physical injuries, Dr. Rodriguez continued. He's been conditioned to associate pain with his working environment. It could take weeks or months to undo this kind of damage. As Dr. Rodriguez worked to treat Rex's injuries, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Conference room B, 1,600 hours. Come alone." Morrison, Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon with Rex, working on basic trust exercises and helping him begin to overcome his newfound fears. When 1,600 hours arrived, she reluctantly left him in Dr. Rodriguez's care and made her way to the conference room. Morrison was waiting for her, along with Lieutenant Colonel Davidson and a woman Sarah didn't recognize wearing civilian clothes. "Sergeant Martinez, please sit," Davidson said, his tone more formal than usual. "This is Agent Jennifer Walsh from the Criminal Investigation Division." Sarah's stomach dropped. The presence of CID meant this had escalated far beyond a simple harassment complaint. "Sergeant, we need you to tell us everything you know about the harassment you've been experiencing," Agent Walsh said, opening a digital recorder. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." For the next 2 hours, Sarah recounted months of incidents she had previously tried to handle on her own. The deliberate scheduling conflicts that made her miss important training sessions. The accidents that damaged her equipment. The rumors and false reports that had been circulated about her performance. Morrison listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed his deep understanding of military protocols and procedures. "Why didn't you report these incidents through official channels?" Agent Walsh asked. "I tried, early on," Sarah replied. "But Thompson and his crew always made sure there were no witnesses, or they would claim it was just normal hazing. My direct supervisor told me I needed to develop thicker skin if I wanted to succeed in the K9 unit." "Who was your direct supervisor?" Davidson asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer wouldn't reflect well on the unit's leadership. "Master Sergeant Williams, sir." Morrison and Walsh exchanged a look that told Sarah they had already spoken to Williams and hadn't liked what they heard. "Sergeant Martinez, based on what we've uncovered so far, this appears to be a systematic campaign of harassment and sabotage," Walsh said. "We believe Thompson and his associates were attempting to force you out of the unit through intimidation and by undermining your professional relationship with Rex. Today's exercise was meant to be the final step," Morrison added. "If Rex had been seriously injured or killed by those attack dogs, it would have ended your career and possibly resulted in criminal charges against you for failing to protect a military asset." The coldness of the plan took Sarah's breath away. "They were willing to kill Rex just to get rid of me." "We believe so," Walsh replied. "And they might have succeeded if Commander Morrison hadn't been conducting his own investigation." Sarah looked at Morrison with new understanding. "You weren't here as a liaison, were you?" Morrison shook his head. "Joint Special Operations Command received reports about problems in this K9 unit several months ago. I was sent here undercover to evaluate the situation and determine if intervention was necessary." "What kind of reports?" "Anonymous tips about harassment, equipment sabotage, and concerns about the safety of both handlers and dogs," Morrison explained. "We take these allegations very seriously, especially when they involve elite units that deploy to combat zones." Agent Walsh leaned forward. "Sergeant, we need your cooperation to build a case against Thompson and his associates. Are you willing to work with us?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need." "Good," Walsh replied. "Because we believe this goes deeper than just Thompson's crew. Someone in the command structure had to approve today's exercise modifications. We need to identify everyone involved." Over the next hour, they walked through the evidence that had been collected. Security camera footage showing Thompson and his allies accessing the kennels after hours. Communications intercepts revealing their planning discussions. Testimony from other handlers who had witnessed harassment but been afraid to speak up. "We'll need you to continue your normal routine while we complete the investigation," Morrison said. "But Rex should stay in the veterinary clinic for now, both for his own safety and as evidence of the abuse." Sarah's heart sank. Being separated from Rex felt like losing a limb, but she understood the necessity. "How long will this take?" she asked. "Days, not weeks," Walsh assured her. "We have enough evidence to make arrests, but we want to make sure we get everyone involved." As the meeting concluded, Morrison walked Sarah back toward the veterinary clinic. "I know this is hard," he said, "but you did the right thing by not backing down today. If you had withdrawn from that exercise, they would have won." "I almost got Rex killed," Sarah replied, the guilt overwhelming her. "No," Morrison said firmly. "They almost got Rex killed. You protected him the only way you could under impossible circumstances." They walked in silence for a few moments before Morrison spoke again. "Can I tell you something about working dogs that you might not know?" Sarah nodded. "The bond between a handler and their dog isn't just about training or commands. Morrison said. It's about trust that goes deeper than words. What Thompson and his crew tried to destroy today, that trust between you and Rex, that's something that can be rebuilt. It takes time and patience, but it can be stronger than before. How do you know so much about K9 operations? Sarah asked. Morrison smiled slightly. I've worked with military working dogs in some pretty challenging environments. Different kinds of operations than what you do here, but the principles are the same. When they reached the veterinary clinic, Dr. Rodriguez met them at the door. Rex is doing better, she reported. The physical injuries will heal quickly. The psychological healing will take longer, but I think he's going to be fine. Sarah went in to see Rex, who was resting in a special recovery kennel. When he saw her, his tail wagged weakly, the first truly positive response she had seen from him all day. Hey, boy, she whispered, kneeling beside the kennel. I'm sorry this happened to you, but we're going to get through this together, okay? Rex moved closer to the kennel door, pressing his nose against the mesh so she could touch it. The simple gesture of trust brought tears to Sarah's eyes. As she sat with Rex, Sarah could hear Morrison and Dr. Rodriguez talking quietly near the clinic entrance. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught enough to understand that they were discussing additional security measures to protect both her and Rex while the investigation continued. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Sarah woke to find Agent Walsh at her barracks door, accompanied by military police officers. We made arrests last night, Walsh informed her. Thompson, Collins, Hayes, and Foster are all in custody. But we need to talk about something else. Sarah's relief at hearing about the arrests was tempered by Walsh's serious expression. What is it? We found evidence that this conspiracy went beyond just those 4 handlers, Walsh said. Someone in the command structure was providing them with information about your schedule, your assignments, and your performance evaluations. The betrayal cut deep. Sarah had always known that some people in the unit didn't support her, but the idea that someone in a position of authority had been actively working to destroy her career was almost too much to process. Who? She asked. We'll know more after the interviews today, Walsh replied. But I wanted you to know that your safety and Rex's safety are our top priorities. Commander Morrison has requested permission to remain on base until this is fully resolved. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Morrison. His intervention had literally saved their lives, and his continued support meant more than she could express. As Walsh prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah with one final piece of information. Sergeant, you should know that your record is being reviewed by JSOC. The harassment you experienced may have prevented you from reaching your full potential in this unit. What does that mean? Walsh smiled slightly. It means that when this is all over, you may have some interesting new opportunities available to you. As Sarah made her way to the veterinary clinic to check on Rex, she couldn't help but feel that despite everything they had endured, this crisis might ultimately lead to something better than either of them had dared to hope for. The morning after the arrests brought an unexpected calm to Fort Bragg. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing with questions about who else might have been involved in the conspiracy against her and Rex. When she arrived at the veterinary clinic, she found Dr. Rodriguez already there, checking on Rex's progress. He had a much better night, Dr. Rodriguez reported. I think being away from the stress of the kennels is helping him heal faster than I expected. Sarah knelt beside Rex's recovery kennel and was relieved to see him stand and wag his tail when he spotted her. The spark of intelligence in his eyes was returning, though she could still see traces of the trauma he had endured. Good morning, boy, she said softly, opening the kennel door so she could pet him properly. Rex leaned into her touch, and, for the first time since this nightmare began, Sarah felt hopeful about their future together. Commander Morrison appeared in the clinic doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder under his arm. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please, Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Morrison settled into a chair nearby and opened his folder. Agent Walsh asked me to brief you on what we learned from the interviews yesterday. Sarah steeled herself for more bad news, but Morrison's expression was more determined than grim. Thompson broke first, Morrison said. Faced with the evidence against him, he tried to minimize his role by implicating others. What we learned is that this conspiracy was much more organized than we initially thought. He pulled out several documents and spread them on the small table between them. This wasn't just harassment. It was a systematic attempt to force out every female handler in the unit. Sarah's blood ran cold. Every female handler? You're not the first woman they've targeted, Morrison confirmed. Over the past 2 years, 3 other female handlers have either resigned from the unit or been transferred out after similar campaigns of harassment and sabotage. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had always known the harassment was personal, but learning it was part of a larger pattern made it somehow worse. Why didn't anyone stop them before now? She asked. Morrison's expression darkened. Because they had help from someone in a position to cover up complaints and manipulate records. Someone who could ensure that formal reports disappeared and that reassignments looked like voluntary requests rather than forced departures. Sarah felt her stomach clench. Who? Master Sergeant Williams. The name shouldn't have surprised her, but it still felt like a betrayal. Williams had been her direct supervisor for over a year. He was the one who had told her to develop thicker skin, who had dismissed her concerns about the harassment as normal military hazing. Williams wasn't just ignoring the harassment, Morrison continued. He was actively facilitating it. Thompson provided him with detailed reports about their campaign against you, and Williams made sure those reports never reached higher command. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been listening while continuing her examination of Rex, looked up with anger in her eyes. That explains why Rex's medical records from his last deployment were mysteriously altered. Sarah turned to her in confusion. What do you mean? I was reviewing Rex's file yesterday to establish a baseline for his current injuries, Dr. Rodriguez explained. Someone had changed his medical records to make it look like he had previous behavioral issues and aggression problems. Morrison nodded grimly. They were building a case to have Rex removed from service. If yesterday's exercise had gone according to their plan, his behavioral problems would have been cited as the reason he attacked those other dogs. The calculated cruelty of the plan left Sarah speechless. They hadn't just wanted to destroy her career. They had been prepared to destroy Rex's reputation and possibly have him euthanized to cover their tracks. There's more, Morrison said, his tone becoming even more serious. Williams wasn't acting alone in the command structure. We found communications between him and Colonel Bradley in the personnel office. Sarah knew Colonel Bradley by reputation. He was known for his old-school attitudes and his resistance to the military's integration policies. Bradley was providing Williams with information about female handlers who were being considered for elite assignments, Morrison continued. Together, they were systematically derailing the careers of women they considered unfit for K9 operations. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. This wasn't just about one unit or one group of handlers. It was an organized effort to roll back years of progress in military integration. How many people have they affected? Sarah asked. Morrison consulted his notes. Based on what we've uncovered so far, at least 8 female handlers across 3 different bases. Some were transferred to non-K9 positions. Others left the military entirely. Sarah thought about those women, fellow service members who had worked just as hard as she had to earn their positions, only to have their careers destroyed by this systematic campaign of discrimination. What happens now? She asked. Agent Walsh is coordinating with other CID offices to interview the affected handlers, Morrison replied. We're building a case that goes far beyond what happened to you and Rex. As if summoned by their conversation, Agent Walsh appeared in the clinic doorway. Her expression was a mixture of satisfaction and anger. We just finished interviewing Colonel Bradley, she announced. He's been relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Sarah felt a surge of vindication, but Walsh wasn't finished. The investigation has expanded beyond Fort Bragg, Walsh continued. We've identified similar patterns at 3 other installations. This appears to be part of an informal network of officers and senior enlisted personnel who were coordinating their efforts to block women from advancing in specialized military roles. The revelation was both encouraging and deeply disturbing. Encouraging because it meant the problem was being taken seriously at the highest levels. Disturbing because it revealed just how widespread the discrimination had been. Sarah, you should know that your decision to stand your ground yesterday has potentially saved the careers of dozens of female service members, Morrison said. If this conspiracy had succeeded, It would have set a precedent that could have been used against women throughout the military. Sarah looked down at Rex, who was resting his head against her leg. She had never thought of herself as fighting for anything larger than her own career and her partnership with her dog. Learning that their struggle had broader implications was both humbling and overwhelming. What about the other handlers who were targeted? Sarah asked. The ones who already left or were transferred? Agent Walsh and her team are reaching out to them, Morrison replied. Those who want to return to K9 operations will have that opportunity. Those who prefer to stay in their current positions will receive formal apologies and corrections to their records. Dr. Rodriguez finished her examination of Rex and approached the group. I have good news, she said. Rex's physical healing is progressing faster than expected. More importantly, his psychological recovery is showing positive signs. What does that mean for getting back to work? Sarah asked. I'd like to keep him here for a few more days to monitor his progress, Dr. Rodriguez replied. But I think we can start some basic retraining exercises tomorrow. Nothing strenuous, just simple commands and trust-building activities. Morrison stood up and gathered his papers. That brings up an important point. Sarah, while this investigation continues, you'll need temporary assignment to other duties. Agent Walsh has some options to discuss with you. Walsh stepped forward with a slight smile. Actually, Commander Morrison and I have been talking about a different possibility. Sarah looked between them, sensing there was something they hadn't told her yet. Joint Special Operations Command has been developing a new program for elite K9 teams, Morrison explained. Teams that would work directly with Special Forces units in high-risk environments. We're looking for handlers who have proven they can maintain their composure under extreme pressure, Walsh added. Handlers who have demonstrated loyalty to their partners even in impossible situations. Sarah's pulse quickened. Are you offering me a position in this program? We're offering you the opportunity to be evaluated for the program, Morrison clarified. If you're interested, you and Rex would train with SEAL teams, Delta Force, and other special operations units. The missions would be more dangerous than your current assignment, but the work would be more specialized and more important. The offer was beyond anything Sarah had ever imagined for her career. Working with special operations teams was the pinnacle of K9 operations, reserved for only the most elite handlers and dogs. What about Rex? She asked. After what he's been through, is he still suitable for that kind of work? Morrison knelt down and gently called Rex over. The dog approached cautiously but without fear, allowing Morrison to examine him with the practiced eye of someone who had worked with many military dogs. In my experience, dogs that have been through trauma and recovered often become even more focused and loyal, Morrison said. Rex has the intelligence and the temperament for special operations work. The question is whether you're ready for that level of commitment. Sarah looked at Rex, who was watching the conversation with alert interest. Despite everything they had endured, his trust in her remained unshaken. That trust, she realized, was worth more than any career advancement. If Rex can handle it, then, yes, she said. I'm interested. Walsh nodded approvingly. Good. But, first, we need to finish dealing with this investigation. I'll need you to testify in the court-martial proceedings against Thompson and his associates. When will that be? Probably within the next few weeks, Walsh replied. The evidence is strong, and with Williams and Bradley cooperating to save their own careers, we expect most of the defendants to accept plea agreements. Morrison checked his watch and stood up. I need to report back to JSOC about your decision. If you're serious about the Special Operations Program, your training will begin as soon as Rex is cleared for full duty. After Morrison and Walsh left, Sarah spent several hours alone with Rex in the clinic. She worked with him on basic commands and was encouraged by his eager response to familiar routines. The trust between them was still there, perhaps even stronger than before. Dr. Rodriguez joined them for the afternoon session, documenting Rex's progress for the official record. I've never seen a dog recover this quickly from psychological trauma, she observed. I think the strength of your bond with him is accelerating his healing. As evening approached, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood ran cold. This isn't over. You made a lot of enemies today. Sarah showed the message to Dr. Rodriguez, who immediately called Agent Walsh. Within minutes, military police arrived at the clinic to investigate the threat. "We'll trace the number," Walsh assured Sarah. "In the meantime, you'll have protective detail until we're certain there are no other threats." The message served as a stark reminder that while the main conspiracy had been uncovered, there might still be others who shared Thompson's attitudes and weren't happy about the investigation's results. That night, Sarah slept in the clinic with Rex, both of them protected by military police stationed outside. As she lay on the narrow cot listening to Rex's steady breathing, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. The harassment and abuse they had endured were terrible, but they had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. More importantly, they had led to an opportunity that could transform both their careers. Rex stirred in his sleep, and Sarah reached over to pet him gently. "We're going to be okay, boy," she whispered. "In fact, we might be better than okay." As dawn broke over Fort Bragg, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: genuine optimism about the future. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, she and Rex would face those challenges without having to watch their backs for enemies within their own unit. The nightmare was finally over, but their real adventure was just beginning. 3 weeks after the arrests, Sarah found herself standing outside the military courthouse at Fort Bragg, preparing to testify in the court-martial of Sergeant Mike Thompson and his associates. Rex sat calmly beside her, his recovery now complete enough that Dr. Rodriguez had cleared him for light duty. The visible bond between them drew respectful nods from other military personnel passing by. Commander Morrison approached from the courthouse steps, his expression serious but not grim. "Ready for this?" he asked Sarah. "As ready as I can be," she replied, unconsciously straightening her dress uniform. "Remember, just tell the truth about what happened," Morrison advised. "The evidence speaks for itself, but your testimony will help the panel understand the human impact of their actions." Agent Walsh emerged from the courthouse, carrying a briefcase full of evidence files. "Good news," she announced. "Foster and Hayes accepted plea agreements this morning. They'll testify against Thompson in exchange for reduced sentences." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. While she wanted all of them held accountable, she was glad the proceedings wouldn't drag on indefinitely. "What about Collins?" Morrison asked. "Still maintaining his innocence," Walsh replied. "But with the physical evidence and the testimony from his former partners, his chances aren't good." As they prepared to enter the courthouse, Sarah noticed several other women in uniform approaching. To her surprise, she recognized 2 of them as former K9 handlers who had been transferred out of the unit in previous years. "Sergeant Martinez?" The speaker was a tall woman with captain's bars on her collar. "I'm Captain Lisa Chun. I wanted to thank you for having the courage to fight back." Sarah shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that spoke of military professionalism. "I'm sorry about what happened to you, Captain." "Don't be sorry," Chun replied firmly. "Be proud. What you did yesterday has changed everything for women in this field." The other woman stepped forward. "I'm Sergeant First Class Maria Santos. I was pushed out of the K9 program 2 years ago. Thanks to your case, I'm being offered the chance to return to K9 operations with a clean record." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a military staff car. Lieutenant General Patricia Hayes stepped out, her presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the area. Sarah had never met the general, but her reputation as a champion of military reform was well known. "Sergeant Martinez," General Hayes approached with an outstretched hand. "I've been following your case with great interest." "Thank you for your support, General," Sarah replied, grateful that someone at such a high level was taking the situation seriously. "Support?" General Hayes smiled slightly. "Sergeant, what you've accomplished here goes far beyond one unit or one base. The investigation your courage triggered has led to policy changes across multiple branches of the military." Morrison stepped forward. "General, if I may, the court session is about to begin." "Of course," General Hayes nodded. "Sergeant Martinez, I'll be observing the proceedings. After this is concluded, I'd like to discuss your future with you personally." As they entered the courthouse, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about getting justice for herself and Rex anymore. It was about setting a precedent that would protect future generations of female service members. The courtroom was packed with military personnel, journalists, and advocates. Sarah noticed several senior officers she didn't recognize, their rank insignia suggesting they had come from outside Fort Bragg to observe the proceedings. Thompson sat at the defendant's table with his military lawyer, his face showing none of the arrogant confidence he had displayed during the harassment campaign. Collins was at a separate table, having elected to face trial rather than accept a plea agreement. The military judge, Colonel Sandra Wright, called the court to order and began with preliminary statements. Sarah was struck by the gravity in the judge's voice as she explained the charges and their significance. These proceedings address allegations of conspiracy, harassment, abuse of authority, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, Judge Wright stated. The court will examine whether the defendants engaged in systematic discrimination designed to force qualified personnel from their assigned duties. Agent Walsh was called as the first witness, presenting the evidence that had been collected over the past 3 weeks. Security camera footage showed Thompson and his associates accessing the kennels after hours. Audio recordings captured their planning discussions. Documents revealed the extent of their coordination with supervisors in the chain of command. When Master Sergeant Williams was called to testify as a prosecution witness, the courtroom fell silent. Williams had accepted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, and his testimony revealed the administrative cover-up that had protected the harassment campaign. I received regular reports from Sergeant Thompson about his activities regarding female handlers in the unit, Williams testified, his voice barely audible. I was instructed by Colonel Bradley to ensure these reports did not reach higher command. The prosecutor pressed for details about the coordination between different bases. Williams's answers revealed a network of personnel who had been sharing information about female service members and coordinating efforts to undermine their careers. When Sarah's turn came to testify, she felt the attention of the entire courtroom focused on her. Rex sat beside her chair, providing silent support as she began to recount the months of harassment and intimidation. It started small, Sarah explained. Equipment that would malfunction at critical moments. Schedules that would change without notification, causing me to miss important training sessions. Comments about my suitability for the position that were dressed up as professional feedback. She described the escalating pattern of abuse, the discovery of Rex's injuries, and the setup that had nearly resulted in serious injury or death for both of them. At what point did you realize this was more than just normal military hazing? The prosecutor asked. Sarah thought carefully before answering. When I found Rex injured and traumatized, whatever they wanted to do to me was one thing. But hurting an innocent animal who was just doing his job, that's when I knew we were dealing with something much darker. During cross-examination, Thompson's defense attorney tried to portray the harassment as standard military discipline and the final exercise as legitimate combat training. Sarah maintained her composure, sticking to the facts and refusing to be drawn into emotional responses. Sergeant Martinez, the defense attorney, said, "Isn't it true that you received preferential treatment because of your gender?" "No, sir," Sarah replied firmly. "I received the same training as my male counterparts. My performance evaluations and mission success rates are part of the official record." "But you admit you had difficulty integrating with your unit?" Sarah paused, considering her answer carefully. "I had difficulty with personnel who were determined to force me out regardless of my qualifications or performance. That's different from having difficulty integrating." When Dr. Rodriguez testified about Rex's injuries, the courtroom atmosphere became noticeably tenser. Her clinical descriptions of the abuse made it impossible for anyone to dismiss the defendant's actions as harmless pranks. The injuries inflicted on this animal were deliberate and systematic, Dr. Rodriguez stated. Someone with knowledge of dog psychology specifically chose methods that would maximize psychological trauma while leaving minimal physical evidence. Commander Morrison's testimony provided expert context about the significance of the bond between handler and dog in K9 operations. The relationship between Sergeant Martinez and Rex represents years of training and shared experience, Morrison explained. Deliberately damaging that relationship doesn't just hurt two individuals. It reduces the effectiveness of a critical military capability. The most devastating testimony came from Hayes and Foster, Thompson's former allies who had accepted plea agreements. Their detailed accounts of the planning and execution of the harassment campaign left no doubt about the systematic nature of the discrimination. Thompson told us that women didn't belong in combat roles and that it was our duty to make sure they failed, Hayes testified. He said we were protecting the unit's standards and the lives of soldiers who might depend on us in combat. Foster's testimony revealed the extent of the psychological manipulation involved in their campaign. We were instructed to document every mistake or perceived weakness, no matter how minor, and to exaggerate them in our reports. The goal was to build a case that would justify removing female handlers from the program. When the prosecution rested its case, Thompson's defense team called character witnesses who testified about his previous service record. However, their testimony was undermined by cross-examination that revealed Thompson's history of complaints about female personnel in other units. Collins chose not to testify in his own defense, relying on his attorney's argument that he was simply following orders from senior personnel. The argument fell flat when recordings were played of Collins enthusiastically participating in planning sessions for harassment activities. During closing arguments, the prosecution painted a picture of systematic discrimination that went far beyond the actions of a few individuals. This conspiracy represents a direct attack on the military's core values of honor, integrity, and equal opportunity, the prosecutor stated. The defendants chose to prioritize their personal prejudices over their duty to serve alongside qualified personnel regardless of gender. The defense attempted to portray their clients as misguided rather than malicious, arguing for leniency based on their previous service records. However, the evidence of deliberate planning and coordination made it difficult to characterize their actions as mere mistakes in judgment. After deliberating for 6 hours, the military panel returned with their verdict. Thompson was found guilty on all charges, including conspiracy, harassment, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Collins was found guilty on most charges, but was given consideration for his lesser role in planning the activities. During the sentencing phase, Sarah was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. She stood before the court with Rex beside her, choosing her words carefully. "This case isn't just about what happened to me and my partner," she said. "It's about ensuring that every person who puts on this uniform can serve with dignity and be judged solely on their ability to do their job. The defendants didn't just attack me. They attacked the principles that make our military strong." She paused, looking directly at Thompson. "I hope their punishment serves as a reminder that discrimination and abuse have no place in our ranks, regardless of the target or the motivation." Thompson received a sentence of 4 years in military prison, reduction in rank to private, and a dishonorable discharge. Collins received 2 years, reduction in rank, and a bad conduct discharge. Hayes and Foster, who had cooperated with the investigation, received sentences of 1 year each with the possibility of remaining in the military in reduced ranks. As the court session concluded, General Hayes approached Sarah and Morrison. "Sergeant Martinez, would you join me for a private conversation?" They moved to a small conference room where General Hayes spread out several documents on the table. "Sergeant, the investigation triggered by your case has led to significant policy changes across the military. But, more importantly, it's opened up new opportunities for qualified personnel like yourself." She pointed to one of the documents. "Joint Special Operations Command has approved the creation of an elite K9 program specifically designed to support Special Forces operations. Commander Morrison has recommended you and Rex for this program." Sarah felt her heart race with excitement, but she forced herself to remain professional. "What would that involve, General?" "Extensive additional training with SEAL teams, Delta Force, and other special operations units," General Hayes explained. "Deployment to high-risk environments where traditional K9 teams can't operate effectively. It's dangerous work, but it's also the most important K9 operations in the military." Morrison added, "The program is being designed specifically to avoid the cultural problems you experienced in the conventional K9 unit. All personnel will be selected based on performance and professionalism, not politics or personal relationships." General Hayes smiled. "Sergeant, what you and Rex accomplished here proves that you're exactly the kind of team we need for this program. Are you interested?" Sarah looked down at Rex, who was sitting attentively beside her chair. His eyes met hers with the same trust and intelligence that had carried them through their darkest moments. "Yes, General," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We're ready." As they left the courthouse that afternoon, Sarah felt a sense of closure she had never expected to experience. Justice had been served, policies had been changed, and new opportunities lay ahead. The harassment and abuse they had endured had been terrible, but it had also revealed strengths and opened doors that might never have been available otherwise. Rex trotted beside her with his old confidence fully restored, his tail up, and his attention focused on the world around them. Whatever challenges lay ahead in their new assignment, Sarah was confident they would face them together. The nightmare was truly over, and their greatest adventure was about to begin. 6 months after the court-martial, Sarah stood on the deck of a Navy destroyer cutting through the dark waters of the Persian Gulf. Rex lay beside her, both of them equipped with specialized gear that marked them as part of an elite special operations team. The transformation in both their lives had been remarkable, but the journey to reach this moment had tested every skill and instinct they possessed. The Special Operations K9 program had proven to be everything General Hayes had promised and more. The training had been intense beyond anything Sarah had experienced in her previous military career. For 12 weeks, she and Rex had worked alongside Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Delta Force operators, learning techniques and tactics that pushed the boundaries of traditional K9 operations. Commander Morrison had overseen much of their training personally, and his expertise had proven invaluable in preparing them for the unique challenges they would face. Unlike conventional K9 operations that focused primarily on detection work, special operations teams needed dogs and handlers who could adapt to rapidly changing situations and work effectively in hostile environments. "Martinez, you ready for this?" The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, the SEAL team leader who had become Sarah's closest colleague in the program. Sullivan was a 15-year veteran who had initially been skeptical about working with a K9 team, but had quickly become one of their strongest advocates. "We're ready, Chief," Sarah replied, checking Rex's specialized harness one final time. The gear included night vision equipment, a communications system that allowed her to receive updates without voice commands that might compromise their position, and protective armor designed specifically for military working dogs. Their mission tonight was complex and dangerous. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound along the Iranian coast. The target was believed to be coordinating terrorist attacks against American interests in the region, but the compound was heavily defended and surrounded by civilian areas that made traditional assault approaches too risky. Sarah and Rex's role was to infiltrate the compound ahead of the assault team, locate and disable any explosive devices that might be used to destroy evidence or harm the assault force, and identify the exact location of the target. It was the kind of mission that required absolute trust between handler and dog, as well as the ability to make split-second decisions in life-threatening situations. The insertion team consisted of 8 SEALs, Sarah, Rex, and 2 Navy explosive ordnance disposal specialists. They would approach the target in small boats, infiltrate from the water, and complete their objectives before dawn. As the destroyer drew closer to the insertion point, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The harassment and abuse they had endured at Fort Bragg seemed like a lifetime ago, but the strength they had developed during that crisis had been essential to succeeding in their new role. Rex had adapted to special operations work with remarkable ease. His intelligence and trainability had always been exceptional, but working with elite military units had brought out capabilities Sarah had never known he possessed. He had learned to work silently in complete darkness, to detect explosives in environments filled with confusing scents and sounds, and to remain calm under conditions that would terrify most dogs. More importantly, the trust between them had deepened beyond anything Sarah had thought possible. They could communicate with subtle gestures and body language that allowed them to coordinate their actions without verbal commands. In dangerous situations where noise could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure, that silent communication was invaluable. Insertion point in 15 minutes, Sullivan announced over the communications system. Sarah ran through her final equipment check, ensuring that every piece of gear was properly secured and functional. Rex watched her preparations with alert attention, his body language indicating his readiness for action. The past 6 months had been filled with successful missions that had gradually built their reputation within the special operations community. They had located improvised explosive devices in urban environments, tracked high-value targets through hostile territory, and provided critical intelligence that had saved American lives and prevented terrorist attacks. Each mission had brought new challenges and learning opportunities. Sarah had developed skills in urban warfare, small unit tactics, and intelligence operations that went far beyond traditional K9 handler training. Rex had mastered advanced detection techniques, silent movement, and the ability to work effectively in environments ranging from desert caves to urban rooftops. Their success had not gone unnoticed. General Hayes had visited their training facility twice to observe their progress personally. Other branches of the military had requested briefings on their techniques and capabilities. Most satisfying of all, the program had been expanded to include additional K9 teams, with Sarah serving as a mentor and trainer for new handlers entering the program. Boats away came the announcement from the ship's bridge. Sarah and Rex joined their team in the small inflatable boat that would carry them to shore. The sea was calm, but the darkness was absolute. They would be navigating by instruments alone until they reached the target area. During the 30-minute boat ride to shore, Sarah thought about the women who had reached out to her since the court-martial. Captain Chun had successfully returned to K9 operations and was now running a training program at another base. Sergeant Santos had not only resumed her K9 career, but had been recommended for promotion based on her exceptional performance. More importantly, the policy changes that had resulted from their case had created new opportunities for women throughout the military. The investigation had revealed discrimination patterns at multiple installations, leading to leadership changes and reforms that were already showing positive results. Sarah had received letters from dozens of female service members thanking her for having the courage to fight back. Some were sharing their own stories of harassment and discrimination. Others were describing new opportunities that had become available to them as a result of the policy changes. Target shoreline in sight, Sullivan reported quietly. Sarah could see the dark outline of the coast ahead of them. Intelligence reports indicated that the compound was approximately 2 kilometers inland, surrounded by a small village that provided cover for the terrorist organization's operations. As their boat approached the beach, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that preceded dangerous missions. Rex sensed her emotional state and moved closer to her side, providing the comfort and confidence that only their partnership could offer. The team landed silently on a small beach and quickly moved their equipment inland. Within minutes, they had concealed their boat and were moving through the darkness toward their target. Sarah and Rex took point, using their specialized training to detect any security measures that might threaten the team's advance. Rex's nose worked constantly, sorting through the complex sense of the coastal environment to identify anything that might indicate danger. 20 minutes into their approach, Rex suddenly froze and sat down, his signal for detecting explosives. Sarah immediately signaled the team to halt while she investigated. Using a specialized detection device, she confirmed the presence of a buried anti-personnel mine approximately 3 meters ahead of their planned route. The mine was well concealed and would have been impossible to detect without Rex's exceptional olfactory capabilities. Sarah marked the mine's location and guided the team around it. But the discovery confirmed that their target was well prepared for potential assault. They would need to be even more cautious as they approached the compound. As they drew closer to their objective, Sarah could see lights ahead that indicated the target location. Intelligence reports had been accurate. The compound consisted of several buildings surrounded by a wall that would provide significant defensive advantages to anyone inside. Rex detected 2 more explosive devices during their approach, both of them positioned to target anyone attempting to breach the compound's perimeter. Sarah documented their locations for the explosive ordnance disposal specialists who would need to neutralize them before the assault team could advance. Using specialized equipment, Sarah was able to observe the compound's interior without being detected. She counted at least 12 individuals inside the main building, with several more in outbuildings that appeared to be used for storage and communications. Most importantly, she was able to identify their primary target, a man matching the description provided in their intelligence briefing. He was in the main building's second floor, apparently conducting a meeting with several other individuals. Sarah transmitted the intelligence to Sullivan and the assault team, who were positioned to begin their operation as soon as she and Rex completed their reconnaissance mission. As they prepared to withdraw from their forward position, Rex suddenly alerted to something Sarah hadn't detected. His body language indicated the presence of explosives, but his behavior was more urgent than his usual detection response. Following Rex's lead, Sarah discovered a sophisticated explosive device that had been rigged to destroy the entire compound if activated. The device was far more complex than the perimeter mines they had already located, and it appeared to be connected to a remote trigger system. The discovery changed everything about their mission. If the terrorists realized they were under attack, they could detonate the device and destroy all the intelligence they were trying to capture, while also killing everyone in the compound, including potential innocent civilians. Sarah immediately transmitted the new information to Sullivan and requested that the explosive ordnance disposal specialists be brought forward to assess the device. However, time was critical. Dawn was approaching, and they would lose the cover of darkness if they delayed much longer. The decision was made to proceed with the assault while Sarah and one of the EOD specialists worked to disable the explosive device. Rex would remain with Sarah to provide security and continue detecting any additional threats. As the assault team moved into position, Sarah found herself in the most dangerous situation of her military career. She was inside a hostile compound, working to disable a sophisticated explosive device, while a firefight erupted around her. Rex remained calm and focused despite the chaos, continuing to alert her to potential threats while staying close enough to provide protection. His training and natural courage were being tested to their absolute limits, but he never wavered in his duty. The explosive device proved to be even more complex than initially thought. It was connected to multiple trigger systems, including motion sensors that would activate if anyone approached the main building without knowing the correct approach route. Working with the EOD specialist, Sarah was able to trace the device's wiring and identify the primary detonation mechanism. However, disabling it would require cutting several wires in precise sequence while avoiding backup triggers that would detonate the device if tampered with incorrectly. As she worked, Sarah could hear the assault team engaging with defenders throughout the compound. The firefight was intense, but brief. The SEALs' superior training and equipment gave them a decisive advantage over the terrorists. Within 15 minutes, Sullivan's voice came through her communications system. Building secured. Target in custody. Status on the package? Working on it, Sarah replied, continuing to trace wires while Rex maintained his alert watch for additional threats. The final step in disabling the device required Sarah to make a decision that could determine whether everyone in the compound lived or died. 2 wires remained to be cut, but the order was critical. Cut them in the wrong sequence, and the device would detonate immediately. Sarah closed her eyes and reviewed everything she had learned during her EOD training. The logic of the device's construction suggested a specific sequence, but she couldn't be completely certain. Rex nudged her hand with his nose, a gesture of support and confidence that reminded her of all the challenges they had overcome together. His trust in her abilities gave her the confidence to make the final cuts. The device went silent, its displays going dark as the power was disconnected. Sarah felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. Package neutralized, she reported to Sullivan. Outstanding work, came the reply. Extraction in 10 minutes. As the team prepared to leave the compound with their prisoner and captured intelligence materials, Sarah took a moment to appreciate what she and Rex had accomplished. They had successfully completed one of the most dangerous missions in special operations, working under extreme pressure to save lives and achieve critical objectives. Rex sat beside her, panting slightly from the stress of the mission, but alert and ready for whatever came next. His trust in her had never wavered, even in the most dangerous moments of their operation. The extraction went smoothly, and within 2 hours they were back aboard the destroyer, debriefing their mission with intelligence officers who were already analyzing the materials they had recovered. "Martinez, exceptional work tonight," Sullivan said as the debriefing concluded. "You and Rex have set a new standard for Special Operations K9 teams." As Sarah settled into her quarters to get some rest before their next assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The harassment and abuse at Fort Bragg had been terrible, but it had also revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed. More importantly, it had led to opportunities she could never have imagined. She and Rex were now part of an elite community of warriors who trusted each other with their lives and were committed to protecting American interests around the world. Rex curled up beside her bunk, his steady breathing soon indicating that he had fallen asleep. Sarah watched him for a moment, marveling at the courage and loyalty of the partner who had stood beside her through every challenge they had faced. Tomorrow would bring new missions and new challenges, but Sarah was no longer worried about the future. She and Rex had proven themselves capable of handling whatever the world might throw at them. Together, they were stronger than any obstacle they might face. The abuse and discrimination that had once threatened to destroy their careers had instead forged them into something stronger and more capable than they had ever been before. They had found their place in the world, and that place was at the very front lines of protecting freedom and justice. As sleep finally overtook her, Sarah's last conscious thought was of gratitude for Rex's unwavering loyalty, for Morrison's intervention at their darkest moment, and for the opportunity to prove that dedication and competence could overcome any form of discrimination or abuse. Their story had become one of redemption, transformation, and ultimate triumph, proof that courage and determination could turn even the darkest circumstances into opportunities for greatness.